Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma231 here, back in today to talk about Oshi chapter number 149. This chapter is titled By the Sea. Of course, we got our star icon logo thing back, except this time it's black, not the regular white that it normally is, so I don't know what's going on here. I'm noticing a lot of weird inconsistencies with this star-shaped thingy here recently, but whatever. You're not going to kill me if I keep looking at him, so yeah. Yeah, how's it going today, guys? Like I said, I'm talking about chapter number 149 of Oshi, and this is Akane, this is a Kana and Akane chapter of Oshi. If I have ever seen one in my life, of course we've had plenty of chapters focused on these two sort of acting rivals in the past, and in this chapter, they aren't particularly acting rivals, as they're more sort of Aqua love idol or rivals, as we see that the both of them throughout this chapter. Like I said, we will focus on pretty much Kana and Akane throughout this entire chapter, with really very little else going on here. Like, there's a few background details, but it's mostly just the relationship between these two, as we just sort of build up after what happened last time, which is, of course, last time in Oshi we had the whole beach episode, as we saw all of our favorite characters. I think there were like a total of 11 of them. Well, let me actually try to count them off here, if I can remember them all, because of course there was, Aqua and Ruby, of course Akane and Kana, there was Taiki and Melt was also there, there was Minami, Frill, and I feel like I'm forgetting, oh, Mimcho, of course. And then we saw that Tsukuyomi was there for like a brief panel, I think. And of course, Gontono was the person who brought him. So yeah, there were like 11 characters there last time, all doing various beach-related activities. And of course, what ended up happening is they were doing the whole beach episode sort of thing. And eventually, I think Aqua went up onto like a mountain somewhere and sort of like sat in like stone silence, as Akane pretty much came up there and told him not to kill Korok because it'd make everybody sad. And then eventually, as she was walking away, she ran into Kana, who said like, hey, I've loved Aqua, or I've liked Aqua, or something like that. And so she was like, hey, I know Aqua, and he'd be happier with you around him. So, Akane, get back together with Aqua. It'll make him happy, so it'll make me happy, because I've always liked him. And that is sort of where we start off this chapter. I think I'm just going to hop right into it, because I think I did all of the spiel in the beginning I wanted to. As we sort of turn back to Pendulum a little bit, I'm sorry. I've been reading a lot of Bleach recently. I've been getting back into Bleach, of course, because, I mean, I've read all of Bleach, but I sort of am going back into it on like a rewatch. And I've sort of been immersing myself in it again. So yeah, we sort of turn back to Pendulum with the stupidest numbered arc in the entirety of manga. What was the number of those arcs? I want to go grab one, like, negative something something. Like, who names a chapter that? It's so stupid, but Kubo, I love your work. Come on, man. I'm not talking about Kubo's work. I'm talking about Oshi. As like I said, we will turn back to Pendulum a little bit to where, we see that, oh gosh, what's her name? Kana is getting some nicely grilled meat on the whole cooktop where they are all cooking. As we see that she's going and messing with this piece of meat, as she's like, all right, I think this meat's actually nicely grilled. And she's like, all right, I'll go bring over this, as she calls Aqua Akun again, because I mean she's called him this a few times recently, sort of like that more familiar tone with him. As we also see that both Minami and Mel are doing various things in the background of these shots. But eventually we see that Kana's like, all right, I'll bring it to Akun. She doesn't exactly know where Aqua is, so as she's walking through the forest, she eventually hears some chatter in the background, where of course Aqua and Akane have been sitting there doing the whole talker. I say that Aqua's talking, really it's just Akane talking this entire time of like, hey, don't kill people, it's not the right thing to do, right? But we sort of get this little semblance of a scene as the two of them are sort of just chatting back and forth, and we see that Kana actually has seen this the entire time, and as the two of them were talking last chapter, we see that she was actually hiding behind a tree in the background listening to these two talk, right? As we cut to the present, to where, of course, Kana had just said like, hey, I know that you two still love, or no, that's what she starts off with. She's like, hey, I know the two of you were dating and all of that, so you should actually get back together because it'll make both of you happier, and of course, it'll make Aqua the happiest out of all, right? Because of course, last time she's like, hey, you'll be the one to be able to melt Aqua's heart, I think was the correct wording there, right? well, Kana's just like, alright, hey, from what I've seen, you two still actually love each other. So she's like, hey, it would be the best if you two just got back together, right? As, Akane's like, hey, what are you talking about? Like, what are you on about all of a sudden, right? As, who's her face? Kana's like, hey, well, you guys look like you were talking on some good terms up there, right? And Akane's like, so you saw all of that? As, Kana's like, hey, it was by accident, not on purpose. I wasn't trying to spy or anything. As she's like, hey, I mean, what the heck? That's how it just is after all, right? As we see that, Akane's just like, hey, that's not true at all. As, Kana starts to walk away on the beach, and she's just like, hey, I know I totally got the wrong idea when he started being very friendly with me again, but she's just like, hey, I guess that's my weak point here, right? And Akane's like, hey, stop it, Kana, listen to me, like, focus your voice, like, realize what I'm about to tell you. But Kana just continues to walk away, just sort of, like, being in a massive denial about all of this. As she's like, hey, but of course, Aqua would definitely choose you over me, who has a sly and nasty personality, right? As we see that, Akane's just like, hey, I said, listen, stop, hold up, like, don't get on to all this. And as she eventually puts a hand on, Kana's shoulder, we see that Kana has begun to cry a little bit. As we see that she's getting very emotional about all of this, because, of course, she has loved Aqua this entire time, too. And little does she know that Aqua loves her in response, right? But Akane is sort of looking at that, and she eventually is just like, we see some sweat pouring down her face. As she's eventually like, hey, Kana, me and Aqua don't have that kind of relationship anymore, right? And she says like, hey, stop making all of these super strange assumptions and forcing your will onto mine. As we eventually see that Kana's like, hey, but you still like Aqua, don't you? And Akane's just like, yeah, I mean, I do, but we're not a couple at that point. And that's it, right? Even if I do still harbor feelings for him, we're not together. So what does it matter? You can do whatever you want to do, right? And eventually she's like, hey, I'm not a woman who doesn't know when to let go of her ex-boyfriend, right? And she's like, hey, I'm still in touch with him and knowing that we've had a clean break, right? And she's like, hey, right now, all I want is a wish for Aqua's happiness. Because, of course, we know that's her end goal is for Aqua's happiness, which will come in the form of not murdering a person, which is a little bit of a funny note to make. But it kind of just sort of continues saying, like, hey, my love for Aqua right now is like a mother to her child, you know? And she's like, hey, it's the kind of love that wants him to go to a good university and to end up getting a good job, right? As eventually Kana just says like, hey, I mean, that sounds like a very solid love to me. As we see that, who's her face? Oh gosh, why can I not remember her name? Why did these two, Kana and Akane, have to have so much of a similar names that I can't think of them on the brief part, right? But, who's her face? Akane says like, hey, I've already put all my romantic feelings in order whenever we broke up, right? We don't have to worry about that anymore right now. As eventually Kana's just like, alright, I see, but she's like, hey, but I still think Aqua has feelings for you, right? And we see that Akane sort of like puts her head on her hair, and like she starts to rub it around, just being like, alright, how long are you just going to cry and whine about all of this? And, Kana's like, hey, well, but if I were Aqua, I'd also choose you, right? As Akane's like, well, why would you do that? But Kana's like, well, the thing is, I mean, you're just pretty, right? As she's like, hey, everyone thinks that you're super beautiful and smart. You also have top-notch skills as an actor, and your personality is so kind. As she says, like, hey, I mean, you're such a goody two-shoes also. She says, like, hey, if I were a man, I would also definitely choose you over me. As we sort of see that Akane sort of hears this and sort of just like starts to twiddle her finger in her hair, sort of like just taking in this massive compliment that Kana just gave her. And eventually, Akane sort of just like looks up and she just like looks straight at Kana. It's like, hey, Kana, you are too ignorant of your own charm. And she's like, hey, seriously, you're pretending to be an adult who's giving up on their dreams always. And she's like, hey, if you like him, can't you just say I'll take him away from you? And she's like, hey, you are such a coward, Kana. As Kana's like, hey, I know, but she's like, oh man, what am I supposed to do? As eventually, Akane's like, hey, you don't even have the courage to confess to him yourself right now. it just seems that you are just constantly running away from all of this, right? As Kana's just like, oh, no, you're wrong about all that. Like I can, right? She's just like, hey, all that just thing is this thing is like the perfect timing, right? Just like, this isn't the time for all of that right now. As we eventually says, like, hey, you're wrong anyway. As we see that Kana just starts to bolt and run away from Akane. As Akane's just like, oh, whoa, what are you doing here, right? As we sort of end off this scene here, as we see sort of the scene of the rest of the characters, excuse me there. As we see the scene of the rest of the characters sort of cleaning up all of their time on the beach. We see both Melt and Aqua sort of cleaning up all of the trash they left on the beach, getting it all in order. Then we see everybody sitting in Gotonda's Volkswagen on the ride back. As we see that, in the back, for this back row, we just see two characters sitting there with Taiki, who is obviously fast asleep, and Akane, who's sitting beside him. And then we see that Kana is sitting in a row in front of them, where Ruby is dead asleep on Kana's shoulder. So it is pretty funny. And then we see the final scene where it seems like Gotonda's parked and let everybody off, and sort of just waving a final goodbye to them as it all shines through. And eventually, we now cut to the morning, where we see that the sun is shining through the clouds, and we see that the apartment building where Kana lives, and we see that she is there laying in her bed. It looks like she has worn a jacket to sleep, which, power to you. I've done that plenty of times before, and especially in the middle of, like, a good old winter, it is very nice to do, but I don't know if Kana keeps her, like, temperature in her room really low, because this is the end of summer, as the last chapter was titled, so it has got to be very hot out right now. So the fact that she's wearing this to bed under all these sheets with the light glazing through her window, making her even hotter, she's got to be very hot. But we see it's the morning now, and of course Kana is up and awake, as we see that she is just very sad, thinking about all the stuff that happened yesterday. As we see that she's just sort of laying awake in bed here, contemplating her sort of whole existence in a way. We eventually hear that her doorbell goes off, as we just hear the ding dong, or ding dong, or just like the dong ding, or whatever it is. We see that her doorbell goes off, and we eventually see that she sort of gets in like, oh man, I've got to get up. As we see that she gets up and very sluggishly moves over to the door, where she's just like very like, oh, man, actually made me yawn pretty big, but, like, she's very tired and all of this, and she moves over to the door. She eventually goes to answer the doorbell, and, of course, this is one of those screened video doorbells to where she can see the person who is standing in front of it. So she presses the little answer button, as we see that there's nobody else then Akane standing in front of her, right? As we see that Akane, through the doorbell, is like, hey, I won't let you get away, right? As we eventually see that Kana's just like, God damn it, what are you doing here? As she eventually opens the door and is like, hey, what do you want this time, right? As we see that as Kana sort of just walks in here, or no, as Akane sort of just waltzes her way into the house, she's like, hey, well, I just figured we'd pick up where we left off yesterday, right? And Kana's like, are you just like not letting that go? Like, I thought we had a clean break yesterday, we figured all of this out, like, what's your problem, right? As Akane is just like, hey, I actually thought very carefully about all of that, and she just says like, hey, in the end, I came up with something that I think is the best solution no matter what, right? As we see that she is fully into Kana's apartment now. Kana just like has a little bit of a joke of like, hey, don't just enter this place without my permission. Like, this is my house, my rules, like, you can't just waltz in here, right? As eventually, Akane's just like, hey, well, now we're just sitting in here. She's like, hey, Kana, I have decided to root for your love, right? As Kana's just like, come again? Like, what did you just say? But we see that Akane is sort of just now sitting on, Kana's couch, and she's like, hey, whether or not you still like him or not, I'm his ex. I mean, you know that, right? She's like, hey, and I do have a lot of information about him, right? She's like, hey, I think I can help you get together with Aqua. And Kana's just like, no, please, I don't get it. Why are you doing this? What is your end goal? What do you benefit out of this? And why are you willing to help me? And I do love this scene because, of course, we see that Kana's face is all like very wobbly, and just like, whoa, why would you do that? Whoa, what's your goal? And she's sort of doing this. I do like how her hair is also, so she's got all that bedhead, so none of it's combed neatly like Akane, sort of just, like, giving more of that idea here to, like, Akane's already into mooring, like, a regal and all of that, as Kana's just like, whoa, what? But eventually, Akane just is like, hey, the person that goes next with Aqua has to be someone who I approve of. As that's what she thinks is, she sort of just answers Kana's question, like, oh, nothing really, I don't gain anything from this, but I'm just willing to help you, right? Which is a little bit of a funny note, because of course, it is sort of showing here that Akane is also sort of down bad for Aqua at the same time, as she's just like, hey, the person who goes next to him has to be somebody I approve of, so it's a bit of a funny note right there. But Kana sort of just, or no, not Kana, Akane sort of just hops straight into it, being like, hey, so how about you just go over and just tell him how you actually feel, right? Just simple as that, very easy, nothing too hard, nothing too easy. And she's like, hey, just tell him how you feel, I'm sure that you can get it done, super simple. And Kana's just like, oh, there's no way I could do it, like, I would never be able to, right? And we eventually see that, who's your face, Akane is just like, hey, don't worry about it, I'll tell you everything, right? And she's like, hey, his favorite clothes, the makeup he likes, situations, I know everything. And she's like, hey, just leave this all to me, right? As Kana's just like, what is this glassy look going on in your eyes? She's like, I'm so scared about all of this, right? But Kana's just like, hey, everything will be perfectly fine. As Kana's like, you're freaking me out right now, like, stop looking at me with those eyes, like, I don't want to be here anymore. And as all of that sort of just starts to happen, we eventually see that, we don't get the end of this conversation, as we now see that Akane is just walking down the street, and, obviously leaving, Kana's apartment, as we see that she's sort of just holding, like, her pocketbook or whatever in her hand, and she's walking down the street. She eventually looks up to a billboard where we see that Aqua is obviously being a model, and we see that his likeness is being used to promote a product that either looks like a shampoo or a lotion or something like that, right? Because, of course, yes, Aqua is a pretty boy, so he's being used for this very simple execution here. And we see that Akane sort of looks up at that, and she's like, hey, and she sort of sings like, hey, Aqua-kun, I know it very well. You don't want to get your loved ones involved in your inner revenge, so you plan to keep yourself distanced from them, right? Which means if you have a girlfriend, it'll be even harder for you to take revenge, won't it? And she says, like, hey, I know exactly what you hate, Aqua-kun. As we see that, of course, she sort of has this sly smile on her face as she looks up at this billboard, where, of course, Aqua is. And that is where we end this chapter on this sentiment of sort of getting another reason why Akane is wanting to help Aqua out. Because it'll be much harder for Aqua to take this revenge against Hikaru, not only if he has a girlfriend, which, of course, Aqua sort of knows that Akane is looking to stop him from doing this. So even if they got back together, Aqua would sort of find a way to weasel around this. But if Aqua sort of gets the girlfriend that he wants in Kana and their love can sort of blossom, maybe all of that revenge will be taken out of his heart and he will no longer be like, alright, I must murder this person, right? So yeah, very interesting sentiment here at the end of the chapter. This chapter is definitely a much faster one to go through for the main point of there's really just two characters that this is focused on, and really just like three major scenes, as it's the talk between Akane and Kana on the beach, the talk between them inside Kana's apartment, and then Akane's final remarks at the end of the chapter. I'll be interested to see how this goes. I know the public outreach online about this chapter has been terrible, as so many people aren't happy with how this sort of arc and current situation is going, as you're like, why do we need all this love triangle stuff? But also, at the same time, this sort of takes out all the incest stuff that's been going on in this series. Don't have to worry about that, because, well, we are obviously getting on between, like, alright, Aqua, stop doing all this stuff with Ruby, that's all taken care of and done, and hey, look, now it's going on, like, alright, the little triangle between, Kana, Akane, and Aqua, so hopefully all of that one plot line's done, because that was a very weird one for a little while there. I mean, we've had to put up with that now for, like, what, almost 20 chapters, or no, over 20 chapters, like 25 chapters almost. So to finally have that over is a little nice, but honestly, at the same time, who knows? Akane is a weird-ass writer and just could start putting more of that in his story again, but whatever. I can't say this was one of my favorite chapters of Oshi no Ko recently. I definitely do understand why people weren't a fan of it, because of course Oshi no Ko is one of those stories based on like, hey, there's the big deal of like, oh, look at this, the revenge plot and all of that, and sort of not having it here is a little bit different. But of course this is going into one of the other like major plot lines in this series of like, hey, the love triangle, who's everybody going to end up with? So this could definitely seem like a very good way to get all this stuff sort of squared away, and I'm not really complaining at all. I think more Oshi no Ko is probably a good thing at the end of the day, and yeah, I really don't have too much else to say about this chapter, and yeah, with that, if you guys did very much like this video, then I hope that you'll like this one enough to go check out some of the other videos on the channel, because I've got plenty of other Oshi no Ko chapter reviews that you can go see my thoughts on, I don't know, chapter number 135, or, I don't know, even 112, because I'm pretty sure I did 112, but I've been doing these for a little while, so I've got a little bit of a backlog stored up, so yeah, go check out those videos. I promise that you will not regret doing that whatsoever. And yeah, another thing you can do to easily help support me is give a like on the video. It's a little simple button, and just say, like, hey, if you like this and want me to make more of these, let me know, because I'll probably make them anyway, but just having a little bit of validation for what I'm doing never hurts at all. And at the same time, hitting the subscribe button, really just a simple way you can, like, help me get my ego more inflated, showing me that, like, yeah, I've got a bigger number now, let's go. It's always sort of fun to see, but yeah, I really don't have too much else to say about this chapter. Pretty good chapter at the end of the day. Of course, the weird inconsistency with the whole black star intro thing by the sea for chapter number 149. And yeah, I don't have anything else to say. Hopefully the love story between all of these various characters blossoms in due time. And without all of that being said, yeah, thank you guys so very much for watching. This has been Glowplasma231. I'll see you next time for chapter number 150. Again, this was chapter number 149 of Oshi no Ko, titled By the Sea. And yeah, this will be Glowplasma231 signing out. Akane and Aqua for the win. Akane x Aqua, Akane x Aqua, Akane x Aqua, bye!